Hello YouTube, welcome to my channel, Anna Bella, and today I'm going to be reviewing The Secret Garden film from 2020. I know it got a lot of complaints and I fully understand where the reasoning comes from, because in The Secret Garden film of 2020 they moved the time period from late Victorian, early Edwardian, as it is in the book, to the 1940s, 1930s, 1940s, just after the First World War, and that changes the whole premise of the movie, because I wasn't sure whether it was the First World War or the Second World War. It was just after as well. It did follow the right reason for Mary Lennox leaving India, which was a cholera epidemic, but they then added Partition Day into it, which I think is an excellent addition. I really do, because I think Partition Day is crucial part of India's history, and I think that is really important that that is included. Not got a problem with that at all. Also not got a problem with Martha being a black maid. Not got a problem with that at all, because this is after the First World War, after the Second World War, and it is very likely that any black people living in Britain would have been domestic servants. That is not all out of the realms of possibility. I know some people complain, but they complain about everything. I fully get the complaints about Channel 5's Anne Boleyn. I fully understand where that is coming from, because Anne Boleyn was a white woman. We've got pictures of it, so yeah. Known established historical characters' ethnicity, I think, is really important, because that's part of their character. That being said, there is the musical Six, which focuses on divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived, all of Henry VIII's 6 wives, and they are played by a multi-ethnic cast, and that works, as does Hamilton. That works as well, and I think theatre is a great experimentation for that. Also, Othello has been played by Patrick Stewart from, you know, Picard, Star Trek days. He played Othello, who is Shakespeare's only black leading man, but all the other parts were taken up by black actors. That's interesting as well. Theatre has been experimenting with race and ethnicity for a very long time. Not got a problem. I think that the problem is when you move it to TV and when you move it to film, it jars, because people like to be challenged in the theatre, because it's live action and people are right in front of you and their performances are brilliant. TV and film is a whole different kind of setting. It will eventually, you know, become far more mainstream to do this, but it's getting our heads around it and figuring out which of the figures we can, because I've not got a problem with George III's wife, Queen Charlotte, being portrayed by a black person, because Queen Charlotte did have historical black links in her ancestry, so that is established. So there are already questions there regarding that. So, but somebody like Anne Boleyn, who is so controversial and her life's been sort of like dissected by everybody, to then have more dissection is sort of like, is this helping or hindering? Who knows? But art is art. I mean, TV and film are art forms. They're not documentaries. And I think that's where part of the problem with The Crown has come in, because people are treating it like a docudrama. And yes, it is a docudrama, but it's actually a work of fiction. The writer does not know what happened, just like we don't know, did Prince Philip cheat on Queen Elizabeth II? If you ask my grandparents who are in their 90s, they seem to indicate that perhaps he did play around, or he did go out with actresses for dinner, and maybe more, who knows. But anyway, that's getting away from The Secret Garden film, which is what I'm supposed to actually be talking about. It was excellent. It featured Colin Firth as Mr. Craven, as Lord Craven, who has actually played Colin Craven in the Hallmark film from 1987. He played the older Colin in that, and that is an excellent film. Only problem with that is they changed Mary Lennox and Colin's relationship. They're not cousins in that one, but that's purely because they wanted them to have a romance at the end, which is kind of a bit silly, because during this time period it was perfectly normal to marry your cousins. We just find it hugely distasteful. Victoria and Albert were cousins. Yeah, Moving on, the 1993 version of The Sacred Garden is just perfection, absolute perfection. That is a brilliant film on many, many levels. The period's right, the timing's right, the characters are right, the actors are right, the script is right, it's beautiful. The big problem I have with the Secret Garden 2020 film is not actually to do with changing the time period and changing the ethnicity of certain characters. That actually works. It's the fact that they made the garden actually magical, when in reality it was the fact that by coming into the garden, by doing the gardening, by watching spring and winter and autumn, because the book starts in winter, then it goes to spring, then it goes to summer, then it goes to autumn. So you go all through those seasons with these characters, and that actually shows the growth of the characters. And that's perfectly natural, because the writer was actually a Christian Scientist, and she believed that with the right mental positive thinking, mental attitude, people could actually affect their health, which we know to be scientific fact now, that people who, you know, have a positive mental attitude, even though they're poorly, tend to get better quicker than people that perhaps don't, which is interesting. And I think that she had far more to tell that way rather than anything else. And yes, The Secret Garden is a controversial book and film because you've got colonialism. It's a film with that as a backdrop, so you are going to get clashing, and it should be there, because either we explore colonialism or we don't. Either that means an excellent story gets put on the shelf for no good reason because people don't want children exposed to it. I'm like, but that's insulting, because British Raj happened. That is a fact. It's one of the reasons why the Durrell's mother could cook really good curries, because she grew up in the British Raj. You know, I mean, history is history. We have to respect it, and we have to understand it to understand ourselves. Anyway, I enjoyed the history change to this because it actually touched on something which I want to talk about later. I found the introduction of a dog really bizarre, because Dickon actually had a fox and a squirrel and wild animals. He wasn't about dogs. Where did this dog come from? It wasn't in the book. I don't know why Hector was there. It was a bit kind of strange, but you did have that added feeling of the fact that Dickon's father had died in the war, so there was loss. But the thing that I think that was really kind of jarring is the fact that they made the children genuine friends, equals, and they're not. And that's really important, because Dickon is the son of a servant. You know, his mother is, his sister is Martha, who's a servant, who we must assume that his mother has been a servant. So, and these Mary Lennox and Colin Craven are unusual children. And the reason they're allowed to be unusual children is because they're upper class children, which means that they get away with their haughtiness. In fact, their haughtiness is expected of them. It's just that their haughtiness has become extraordinary, and they are ungovernable. And they need taming and they need reining in. But actually, upper class children were expected and did give orders to servants. It was quite normal. So, but that's because they've moved the time period again to the 1940s, and things were becoming a little bit more even, but it would be highly unusual, because it was very clear in the 1993 movie that Dickon was in training to be the gardener. If you didn't pick up on that, you should have done, because that was why he was there. He was there to learn from Ben, and also to bring his animal husbandry skills into the household. Yeah? Sneaky way in of getting the, yeah, Dickon can get a job, he can be the gardener. The new Secret Garden film focuses on one thing that did happen and is historically accurate. Yes, it did become very Jane Eyre towards the end, and they did speed up, and they created extra tension, like with the school uniform being placed there and it was going to happen tomorrow, just to move it along, whereas like, the Secret Garden is supposed to be slow, because we're talking about the growth and change of character, which takes time. So all of these sort of forced time periods to make it more quick, to make it more sparky and quick, don't actually help this story. And the addition of the fire made it very Jane Eyre. I'm like, this is not Jane Eyre for children, this is the Secret Garden. Why is the house on fire? And I'll tell you why the house is on fire, because this is a really important fact. after the First World War, a lot of the big country houses became uneconomic to keep. People couldn't afford them because we were cash strapped. So what they did was they burned them down and they used the rubble to go under motorways, to go under various other things, because they were so expensive to keep. And there's a website devoted to all of the England's lost country houses that were pulled down for various reasons because you just couldn't afford to keep them. They were too expensive to run, too expensive to keep. I like that addition, but also I didn't like the fact that it was like, you know, Mary had to go in to save the father. Well, actually she's there to heal and talk with Colin, because it's through Colin. Colin saves his dad, not Mary. Mary saves Colin so that Colin can save his father, because that is the story. Dickon saves Mary, helps Mary grow. Mary then helps Colin to grow. Colin then helps his father to grow. That is how it goes. It's not all from Mary. You know, she's the spark that then this chain reaction happens. And I think that that is interesting because, again, you're taking away from the book. And I fully get why people would want to add more magic. I'm like, no, the gardening is magic itself. You put in a seed and suddenly it grows. It's the magic of nature. And also you've got that Indian mysticism that comes in as well, that people sort of go, really, why is that there? And I'm like, Mary is a British Raj child. She would have been told stories by her ayah. She says that she was told stories by her ayah, and they are all Hindu stories, because she's talking about Rama and Sita at the very beginning. It's fantastic. And I think that that's really important, that it actually be in there. And as movies go, nothing is going to top, for me personally, the 1993 one. In fact, I actually like the 1987 Hallmark movie as well. So it goes 1993, 1987, and then 2020. It's just not as powerful and as punchy, even though it does feature the boy from the Dark Materials, BBC's Dark Materials series, who plays Will, and he's an excellent up-and-coming young actor. All the actors in this are lovely, the performances are great. It's just, I think that the story has been rushed. It's forcing the story to go down an alternate path that perhaps it doesn't naturally bend to. I did like the fact that Mary took Colin to see his mother's room. I found that really interesting, and the pictures, the actual photographs being there, I felt that you got more depth into their relationship, whereas in the 1993 one you have the you do have the photos, but you don't sort of see the lifestyle like the 1930s, 1920s flapper thing going on, whereas here we clearly see that. Yeah, it gives more depth to like their mothers, which I think is really important, because I think some films have overlooked that. But then again, it really is about 3 children in a garden. It isn't really about 3 children inside, and I actually found how they shot it really kind of awkward. I like the fact that you've got the statues. It should always be, you had the moors and the wailing and the statues being horrific and the long sort of foreboding Gothic setting, because it does have some Bronte hints to it. It does The Secret Garden, it really does. Like in the Downton Abbey front, because that's the hall that Downton Abbey was filmed at, as we all know. But I feel that after that they then imposed these really narrow corridors to make it feel quite tight, as if like they were all sort of living in like one floor. And I know that people did do that. If they had big houses, they would only live in 2 floors and the other floors would be covered over unless they had guests to save money. It's quite common. But this felt a bit ridiculous. But then again, this house had been used as a hospital, like many of the country houses have been used in a hospital to nurse the First World War soldiers. So that is also a fact that they took and they added. But did we need to have all these additional facts? There's enough history going on in the book itself that I felt that Colin was, his whole characterisation was sort of shoved to the side. And yes, he's not walking by the end of the film, he's still using a stick and he's standing, but he's using the stick. You didn't feel that they actually, I think they felt, we'll make the garden magical and he'll heal like his internal character, but we don't want that to be manifested physically because it's kind of like saying all disabled people can be cured. And it's like, but actually if you read the book, Colin isn't disabled, he's just premature and frail. And he's just not been exposed to these things. He's now at a stage in his life where if he doesn't get exposed to these things, then he never will. And he will live his whole life in a bed. And that's not good for anybody. He actually needs challenging, and Mary's the right one to do it. And that's why I like the Hallmark Secret Garden so much, is because one of the nurses turns around and says, well, if he had a sibling, that would have actually encouraged him to do more. Like Mary is what the nurse is saying, and she's saying no, it's good for him, he needs this, he needs to be challenged. And the thing is Mary can challenge him because one, she's his relation, and two, they're of the same social class, so she can push through to him. Even though she's the girl, they're on evenly matched because they're both the sole heir of their parents, and that matters because it means that their backgrounds are equal, so they can work on terms of equality. Whereas Mary and Dickon, yes, they do have a friendship, but you noticed in particularly the 1993 one, Dickon never oversteps his bounds, even though they do have that look where they're on the swing and you sort of think, does Mary love Dickon or is she going to go with Colin? There is always that. It's like becomes this weird love triangle, and it's like, is it there or is it not there? And everybody knows that she's going to end up with Colin. It's kind of inevitable. Anyway, I've talked enough. Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think about The Secret Garden 2020 film. I know that a lot of people panned it, but actually it does have some really unique gems within it. I would give it a 3 out of 5. It's never going to beat the 5 out of 5 that is the 1993 version. It's never going to beat the Hallmark version from 1987, and that's 4 out of 5, because they follow the book. And the book is all about 3 children becoming friends, working in a garden and nurturing and growing not only the garden but also themselves physically and mentally in every which way, and healing, because they're both 3 highly unusual and misfit children. We've got a boy that, you know, can talk to animals. We've got a girl that is so surly and sour that is just and then you've got Colin, who not only is surly and sour, but throws fits if he doesn't get his way. So he's like a 2-year-old having tantrums, but also because he's like a 2-year-old having tantrums, it's affecting his physical health. He might not be getting a hunch, he might not be getting a lump on his back, he might not be getting a hunchback, but he is stunted. So he's like a plant that has been left in the dark and he needs to come out into the light. Yeah, there's some basic science. I mean, that is basically the story. Mary brings light to their lives because the book begins in winter. You know, I mean, did we need all the other stuff? But there were some really good gems in there, really good. But I'm like, why did we have the trap and the dog? It just didn't make any sense. And then she left the dog with an injury and then going back and all this business with the lunch. Yeah. It just didn't make very much sense, because if you have an injured dog, you take it and get it sorted then and there. You wouldn't leave it. But that's me quibbling. Anyway, please like, comment and subscribe and let me know what you thought. Bye!